Franchisee marketing can be pretty tough. There's a lot of confusing lingo. You're used to running your franchise, getting your business going. Then you've got to learn all of this new information to actually find people to buy the franchise from you, to become franchisees. And so we're going to be breaking down some of the common misconceptions and some of the marketing lingo that can get confusing when you're trying to land your first franchisee or you're early on in landing franchisees. And so welcome back to Franchise This. I'm actually your producer, Joseph Lewin, and I'm going to be talking to the guy who's going to be doing most of the hosting moving forward, Sean McKay. And we're going to be diving into this topic today. So thanks so much, Sean, for jumping on.
Thanks, Joseph.
Yeah, so to lay the groundwork, a lot of franchises, they're doing something that's fairly unique, or a lot of times, they've come up with a process that's proprietary and that's why they're able to franchise. But then sometimes when you take that idea into the marketing side where you're going, hey, my franchise is unique, therefore how I get franchisees needs to be totally custom to what we're doing. That kind of comes into play. So is every franchise unique when it comes to finding franchisees, or are there things that are universal or close to it when you're doing franchise marketing?
Great question. I think this happens to every marketer that we take on a client and they tell us about how unique they are. And they're not wrong. I mean, every business is unique and the way they operate, like you said, the processes, they might be doing something very different. But more times than not, the doctor's prescribing something similar, right? So us as marketers, like we're prescribing, we're strategizing a lot of the same tactics that we found that worked for other franchises. Reinventing the wheel every time just doesn't make sense. Not only is there just not enough ideas to go around like to do that, but it's impractical, and then you don't get the benefit of the learning that's already taken place by the hundreds of people before you. But there are things that are very different from one to another that really do impact the marketing, the approach, and the results. One of them is depending on how early stage this franchise is. If it's brand new and there's no franchisees, that is a lot tougher than if even they have one. If they have one or if they have 10. And there's kind of like these benchmarks. And if you have 30 franchise locations open, now you're getting big time investors, groups. You might find private equity
Hmm.
that are looking to come in and open up multiple units. But when you have zero, they're not taking that risk. You're then dealing with potentially friends and family. You might be dealing with neighbors, customers, colleagues. And then maybe you might get that first franchise from marketing efforts from literally just a cold person off the street who's looking for a new opportunity to change their life. It's a lot harder. The other thing that impacts it is how much the investment is. What is the initial setup costs going to be? What's the out of
Hmm.
pocket liquid capital requirements? If this is a virtual business, boom, great, simple. If it requires a huge footprint, it's going to be expensive to open and build out. It's going to be harder to find that first one. So there are a lot of those little details that do play into creating a different and unique approach. But ultimately, strategically, we're doing a lot of the same things. Tactically speaking, we're doing a lot of the same things, I should say.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of times there are some things that are unique, but you don't want to get so custom most of the time. Majority of the time, you don't want to get so custom that you're reinventing the wheel, because then your chances are that you're going to not overspend at that point are extremely high. So you're taking the things that are common
Yeah.
across the board to make sure you're getting most efficient economies of scale and learning from other people's mistakes and all of that. But then you still need to understand the business enough to apply the right tactics. So even though a lot of tactics do apply across the board, maybe there's certain levers that you pull if it's super expensive to open versus, if it's pretty low upfront cost, etc.
Yeah, I mean, we've worked with clients that specific example, 2 different companies that both had 0 franchisees open, franchise locations, all corporate stores. Both were fairly successful. They had good revenue out of their corporate locations, but one, the build out cost was, or the liquid capital requirements were going to be like 3 times the amount. No, maybe no surprise to anybody listening, but that one was a lot harder to generate leads for. So yeah, we do have to take a slightly different approach for that. And the way that we educate and the way that the ads that we put out and the people we're targeting might vary for sure.
So another common thing that comes up when people are, especially when they're new and they're just getting into this, they've got maybe one franchise location or they're working on their first franchise location. They haven't necessarily built out a whole marketing engine, especially one that's effective. So another question that
Yeah.
comes up is how long does it typically take to see results to landing your first franchise or getting things going?
Really, again, depends. Oh gosh, every marketer's like, it depends. It's like
Right.
our biggest cop out word, right?
Right.
But if you're working with a sales organization that comes with the automation, they've built out the email scripts, text messages, they have the sales process nailed down. And if you're working with a marketing firm who has their end of it locked down and can systematize it and deploy it rapidly, you can get up and running in ads going in maybe 10 days. As long as you have all the compliance issues figured out. This is all like post legal compliance, which is a nightmare. But if you get through all that stuff, yeah, you could be running ads in 2 weeks. But typically it takes, like we said last time, hundreds of leads on average, somewhere around 300 leads before you get that one diamond in the rough. And the duration of time that it could take depends on what is your cost per lead and how many dollars are you spending. You can really expedite that by spending more money and shrink the time it takes. But
Mm.
yeah, it's not overnight. I'll say that. And I think if we look at any traditional business, the time it takes for them to really like dial in their marketing, like companies spend a year, 2 years doing that sometimes.
Yeah.
Like you don't just hire an agency and then, oh, everything's perfect. Like it just
Right.
doesn't work that way. So yeah,
Yeah, and you have to think of it almost in the way that both of us have done business to business marketing, and it's kind of in a similar category with how much people are spending. And those sales tend to be very complex. They're longer
it,
because it's more money. There's a lot more
yeah,
money being invested. So if you're asking someone to invest their life savings or a huge chunk of their retirement into
right.
franchising, it's going to be a longer sales cycle and a longer process, and you have to find exactly the right people. So it makes sense that that would take a long time. Just for the sake of it, and we're going like very broad here, painting with a broad brush. What would you say that the average range? Is it like, hey, if we dial this up pretty decent, let's just say they're spending a decent amount of money, they're not at the top, they're not at the bottom. Is it usually like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months before you start seeing people getting close to finding
Gosh,
somebody, or it's just
you're
like
gonna pin me down on
so
this,
it depends?
Joseph. Um,
I mean, if it
okay.
really is, it totally
Yeah.
depends, but
I
I
mean, yeah, again, yeah, it
give you an
depends.
idea.
There's my cop out statement. Good lawyer here. But no, okay, if they're a brand new brand, no franchisees under their belt yet, they also probably have a tighter budget unless they're separately funded somehow. So their ad spend's going to be lower. That means you're going to get fewer leads per month and it's going to take longer. That could be maybe 10 months to get their 300 leads, and
Okay.
it's a decent amount of time. And then the process of opening your first franchise store, is going to take months and months depending on site location, site selection, compliance, legal, build out and
Right.
funding and financing. There's so many steps. So that first year is the hardest. But then we have like I have a client right now. They are in a very hot sector. They have a low costs to entry. This year they've opened 6 locations and they have another 6 like ready to go. And they're able to get like a good prospect every month. Maybe not each one is signing for sure, but they're able to get someone good, worthwhile talking to each month that is interested in moving forward, at least initially. Their turnaround time is much shorter. And again, it's almost exponential to a point because once you start getting momentum, people want to hop on that train before it's too
Yeah.
late. You got to think too, a franchise, like you're only going to have so many stores in San Francisco or in New York City.
Yep.
And so if someone's in that big market and they want to play with your business in those big markets, they got to get in before someone else does.
Yeah.
So it becomes this kind of FOMO thing that happens and it really steamrolls. Like one of our other clients, they have 30 franchise locations and they have like another 30 that are pending. So it's like that scale is very quick.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think the reason I'm asking that question, digging in, is just because if you've never done it, it's hard to just go, okay, I'm going to shell out money for an indefinite amount of time. And obviously, you can't promise, there's not a guarantee on that. So then it's like, well, yeah, it could take 12 months or 14 months to land your first person. But on the flip side, you could get lucky and you could end up finding that diamond in the rough in your first 50 leads, and so then it could
Totally.
be faster. So it really does depend. But I know when
Yeah.
people are going to make a big purchase, they're usually trying to have in their brain, they're trying to go, "Hey, what's the framework here?" Right? And I think you gave some good illustrations on how to think about that, and that's really helpful.
Well, we've had another client that they spent I don't know, a year with another agency and partially doing their own ads on their own. And then they came to us, and within the first month, we had a good prospect at, at their door, and they were spending very little, like
Mm.
$2,500 a month, which is not a lot in the lead gen space, considering our cost per leads that we were talking about last time. So,
Yeah.
like you said, you can get lucky quick. It's not something you plan on, but for sure.
Yeah, that's super helpful just to kind of give some frame of reference for people as they're getting into this. Because also we've talked about this a little bit last time too, but you really don't want to start if you don't have the capital to see that through, because then you're gonna seriously be in trouble. If you're digging into this and you end up not actually having enough to go until you get somebody. So if you're not prepared to run for 9 to 12 months, and you don't have the spend to do that, then it's probably, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you're probably better to wait a little while and make sure that you actually have the capital to see it through. And then if it happens to go faster, then you're in good shape. But I don't want to speak out of turn. So if you feel differently
No,
about that.
I mean, that's I'd love to talk about this in another episode too, like the idea of a best practice, but getting started, it's great if you have some foundation built for the business and for the marketing before we start doing lead gen. Sure, you can start a franchise and then the day after you get your paperwork, start doing franchise lead gen, but building up your own systems and processes and getting, your revenue up in your main store so on paper it starts to look better and more healthy, and building some hype and, going to conventions and meeting people who are in the franchise space, like doing all that stuff and building out your own network, asking friends and family. That's a great start. You start there and then you build a movement, you build hype, and you crush your social media, you do all these things the right way. And you may not even need to spend as much on the actual lead gen part of it. But those are great things to have set up before we even get started.
Yeah, and I think we pretty much spent enough time on that topic, but it's kind of interesting what you're talking about there because if I mean, I live in Cincinnati and a huge group of restaurants there are like Skyline Chili. I actually don't know if they're a franchise or not, but let's just say that they are. If I see an ad come across my news feed for, hey, become a franchise owner of a franchisee of a
Exactly that.
Skyline, I'm gonna go, oh, Skyline, they're super established. Everybody loves them. This is gonna be great. But if it's like,
If I see
sort of,
that, I'm like, I don't freaking know. Like, could be
yeah.
anybody.
But then if it comes across and it's like Joe's Bagels and I've never heard of them before, and
Exactly. Sorry, Joe's Bagels.
yeah, exactly. Sorry, Joe. Well, my name's Joe. That's why I did
I
that.
know that was confusing, right? Yeah, my bad.
But there's another smaller group of restaurants. They are called Holtman's Donuts, and so I've heard of them because they've got great donuts and they're local. So if they franchised, again, I would be like, oh wow, they're franchising. Those are great donuts. That might be worthwhile because these are great. Everybody needs to have a Holtman's Donuts. But again, if it's something I've never heard of, much less likely. So that makes a lot of sense. So as we're talking about cost
Yeah,
and timeline and everything like that, I want to get into billing because that part can get really confusing,
yeah,
especially when you're working with agencies. Everybody does a little bit different, so it can be really hard to calculate what your all-in costs are going to be and everything like that. So, could you break down
yeah.
what are some of the typical ways that agencies bill if you're going to work with an agency and kind of how those models work?
Some agencies, it's the more you spend, the more they charge. So there's an incentive for the agency to get you to spend more money. And although that can be aligned with everybody's goals, like you all can be aiming for the same thing, and it can be a positive thing to bill that way or to sign up for something like that. We find it's detrimental to smaller firms because then when they increase their budgets, they're also got to increase their spend with us. And it kind of weighs them down, and it maybe demotivates them actually from spending more money, which ultimately we want them to spend more ad spend, because as they do, they're going to get more leads and more
Yep.
and faster turnaround times, and everything will be better. But if it also comes with us having an increased cost, but sometimes it comes across like as if we presented that idea just for our own sake. So I like the flat fee pricing, more like a retainer based or project based. Like, hey, we all agree this is what we're going to do, and sure, there can be limits to it. Like, we're going to cover you up to a certain amount of ad creatives, or this covers a certain amount of ad spend, even. I think that's appropriate.
Yeah.
But having an agreed upon price isn't going to change every time they, spend a few extra bucks here or there, is the way I like to do it.
Yeah, and it just helps things to be a little bit more predictable too, right? Because as we're talking about, look, you're managing your own business on top of trying to land this, having some of that predictability can be really helpful. So then, when it comes to billing and that side of things, that's kind of a nice segue into guarantees, and kind of how guarantees work. So some people in the space don't make guarantees and they say, hey, there's no way we can guarantee this. It depends on your business, everything like that. And then, other people might make a guarantee, but are they really going to follow through on that? So how should people, when they're going to look for an agency, should they look for guarantees? And if they do, what should they be looking for?
I'm not a fan of gimmicks. Obviously, there's a right and wrong way to do this. And I think if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. But our process, we call it the franchise accelerator package. If that process is followed, we're so confident that we can get you 10 good leads within the first month that we have a guarantee associated. If we don't meet that, we're going to continue optimizing your ads at no cost. But that franchise accelerator package includes all these other steps that ensure that we're getting the right leads and that they're followed up upon correctly.
Hmm.
If you don't have those processes in place, or you just hire us to just do the advertising bit, just run meta ads, then we can't make those same guarantees because I don't know how you're following up with them. And I don't know what qualification steps they go through. And we may not have the budget or the time and effort to be able to do the targeting that we'd like to do in our franchise accelerator package. So yeah, I mean, it depends. We don't go overboard with promoting the guarantee, but certainly for all of our clients that are on our accelerator package, we do offer that guaranteed 10 leads within the first 30 days. And if not, we're going to continue to optimize without additional charges.
That seems pretty solid. And I mean, I've been around lots of different marketing areas, and as a marketing agency, you can't go too crazy with guarantees because you are dependent on things that are completely outside of your control a lot of times. Like,
Right.
is the franchise actually something people want to buy? And
Well,
if
yeah.
it's
See, the
not,
other thing is it forces us to really be picky about who we take on. Because if I don't think I can meet that, it doesn't behoove me to take you in as a client. So, yeah, you're so right. There's some franchises that are more appealing than others, and maybe are a little more established, or have a little bit better value or offer, and we tend to gravitate more towards those clients. Yeah, you're super right. There's a lot of things outside of our control, and I'm the number one skeptic guy. Like, that weirdo Ty Lopez. I hope he listens to this. When he ran an ad, it was like, if you search ChatGPT, I'm the number one marketer, and it's like, oh, you're not, bro. I just checked. And whenever I see a guarantee in marketing, or like, oh, we're not going to charge you until you make $1 million or something crazy. Like, I'm like, yeah, right, buddy. So, I'm not some goofball or corny guy that's going to do something like that. But I think if you follow our process, I'm so confident in the process that we have laid out and the times that we've tested it, that it's kind of a no brainer that we can get those 10 leads for you.
yeah. And one thing that you talked about that I think is part of the key of you being able to do that is the fact that you on that package are walking through all the different elements, which is a huge
Right.
piece because it's really difficult as a marketer to come in and be in charge of, let's just say, ad spend, right? And that's all you're doing, which I know you guys can do. But if you're just doing ad spend, it's really hard to even optimize that effectively because it's like maybe we're getting all the right people, but they're bouncing off of the page because it's not optimized correctly. Or if we're managing ad spend but not the creative, maybe we have all the targeting right, we've got the amount right, we've got the locations right, all of that's set, but then the creative isn't right. So part of that is the value of having one team doing all of that is they're going to be checking and making sure that all of it works together. And if it's not, you have an incentive to actually go through and make sure that it's not just optimizing, the one piece of it is being able to optimize across the board. So like if you're bringing people in but they're not converting into leads, well, you actually can see that and you have the ability to make that change. So that's huge. So there's another really big kind of black hole scary word in the franchising space of compliance. It's caused a lot of challenges, and I know that you're not a franchise lawyer, so there's kind of only so far that you can talk about that piece, but it does
Yeah.
play a role in franchisee marketing, what you're allowed to do, the differences between states and what they
Right.
allow you to do from a franchisee marketing perspective and everything like that. So I'd love to kind of wrap up by you talking about what role compliance plays in this whole process.
Yeah. So, there's so many legal pitfalls and expenses that come up with starting a franchise. I just heard another franchisor talk about this on another podcast. They said, they planned on their initial franchise legal setup to be about $250,000. It's a lot. And then when you finally get through all that stuff, you got all your paperwork, you feel like you're done, and then you go to run an ad and there's more. What I know, and again, not an attorney, but there are registration states where before you can even offer, sell, or advertise a franchise in that state, you have to send that state department you've registered your franchise with them. You send them your FDD, your
Mm,
franchise disclosure document, and then that state agency gives you approval to be able to advertise in that area. And generally it comes with a fee. So, hidden taxes. I think there's 13 registration states. I know California, New York are some of the big ones, and Maryland, and I don't know, there's a bunch of others. And then there's also states that after you create your ad, so you got your ad ready to go, you've registered with the state of California, and now you want to run the ad, that you have to send them the ad with the copy, the graphics for approval.
mm,
And most of them, the approval process goes something like if you send it to them and then within 14 days they don't tell you no, then you can assume it's a go and you can run the ad, which is weird. But yeah, it's constant red tape, and then it keeps going. Let's say so you've registered with the state, you sent them your ad, they approve it, or they don't tell you they disapprove it, and then you go run it on Meta. Let's say now Meta has their own franchising rules and compliance regulations. So like there's certain things you can or can't say in there that are specific to Meta. One of the weird things is like over the last few years, Meta's been gradually putting franchise ads in a special ad category for employment,
mm,
saying that franchise ads are equivalent to employment ads. And therefore, you couldn't target by certain demographics, kind of like equal opportunity stuff that you would use for hiring, running an ad about hiring an employee. But it's
mm,
nothing like employment. Like you're looking for an investor, you're looking for someone who's got 100 grand to be part of your business. It's not
mm,
hiring a worker. But Meta saw it that way, and they were pinging or blocking these ads. And then they've officially rewrote the policy now to include franchising as part of the employment policy. So it's in black and white. If you're running a franchise ad on Meta, you're now in a special ad category lumped in with employment. And that makes it so you can't use certain targeting demographics and custom audiences. And, it's really a pain. It's a restriction that is unfortunate for all the advertisers out there, but at least we're
yeah.
all on an even playing field. We all abide by those rules mostly. So
Yeah, so to tie a thread on that, obviously, franchises need lawyers to help them with all the
yeah,
compliance stuff because it's it's
yeah,
very complicated. That's probably not a DIY type,
not at
project,
all.
not something that you could have a marketing agency who's gonna be able to, like, solve the compliance problems for you all the way. But what role should a marketing agency play, or what role do you play with clients when it comes to figuring out compliance? Do you help them with that stuff? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I interface directly with their lawyers most of the time and make sure they get the ads and the copy they need to be able to send those along. If they have a sales consultant, we'll work with them to make sure they're registered in the right. So we're targeting the states that they're registered in, and double check that they don't have to register in other states. So there's a lot of, us playing kind of middleman and just connecting all the dots and making sure everything's buttoned up before we go live. So yeah, we're glad to quarterback that stuff, but obviously we can't do any of the submissions for you. Now on the Meta side, of course, that's up our alley. We're going to submit the ads, and we design them in a way that we know is going to get passed, and we put the compliance cop out statements at the bottom and all that jazz. But yeah, there's still some extra stuff that we include at no charge because it's got to happen.
Awesome. Well, this is super helpful to just kind of break down some of these things that I know you've run into a lot, common misconceptions or things that can be really confusing for franchisors who are looking to land their franchisees, especially early on. First one or first few can be really confusing and really daunting. So, Sean, thanks so much for taking time to help break some of these things down and make things a little less confusing as people are starting to step into this world of franchising their business.
Of course, glad to help.
And Franchise This is available wherever you listen to podcasts officially. So go ahead and check us out and leave a review, and we'll see you guys next time.